Labor industry, 4 times as many are trafficked for labor purposes, whether it's food picking or construction. And Scott Braddock joins us from the construction industry. Houston is a large international city, and it's got the second busiest port in the United States. It's host to many high-profile events, including the Super Bowl in 2017. The city's commerce and proximity to the border, as well as the I-10 corridor, make it a magnet for domestic and international human trafficking. Our discussion this morning begins with a discussion on trafficking and connecting the dots to create laws with the help of to help people come out of the shadows and curtail the practice. This morning, the bios of the 4 panelists are in your booklet, as well as a number of bills before the House, as well as the Senate bill that was already passed. Letty Ashworth is joining us from Delta Airlines. She testified before the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, basically on lessons learned from Super Bowl preparations. She's been involved in preventing international human trafficking. Delta became one of the first airlines to adopt the Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection's Blue Lightning Initiative, and according to the Homeland Security Committee, is the only major U.S. airline on board. Earlier this month, she was recognized for her groundbreaking work by Human Rights First, and last week was in Europe discussing human trafficking. Sheriff Garcia, you know him from his days at HPD as well as City Council. One thing usually not known about the sheriff, he's looking at me right now wondering what's coming. He's the only sibling, his parents came from Mexico. He's the only sibling that was born in the United States. Cardinal DiNardo, later next week, celebrates his 10th year in Houston, and we've all been fortunate to have him. He also was elected in November as Vice President of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, which is basically the public policy arm of the Catholic Church in the United States. Usually, the Vice President becomes President of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops 3 years later, which means November 2016. Our Cardinal will be the President of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. That is 91% of the time it usually happens. Don't jinx it, no, it's fairly typical. And Scott Braddock also joins us, as I noted, from Construction Citizen, has his own blog with Texas GOP Vote. And our purpose this morning is to have each of them present 2 to 3 minutes of an overview from their perspective on the trafficking and connecting the dots for immigration reform. You do have cards at your table if you have a question. We are on a tight schedule for the Cardinal's schedule that he's been very kind to rearrange. And Cardinal, if you want to start, you all have microphones next to you that are on. So, Cardinal DiNardo.
I first want to thank our singers this morning for a thoughtful presentation about being alone and not being alone. It's a good video. As always, Dr. Kleinberg has the statistics right at his fingertips, and the statistics always include human persons with it. So I thank always Dr. Kleinberg for his excellent work. I'm here from the point of view, I'm not an expert on some of the issues as some of the others are. If you want to know more about some of the emphasis or what happens in human trafficking, you can talk to some of my priests who are in some areas of the city and have spoken to me frequently about what happens, particularly in dealing with immigrants who are undocumented. I'd like to, in my brief time, to start with just a brief quote from Pope Francis. I had the privilege 1 year ago last week of being one of the ones in the room that elected him, and he has from the beginning shown his concern for the poor. In a recent statement in one of his documents, Pope Francis said, "I have always been distressed at the lot of those who are victims of various kinds of human trafficking. How I wish that all of us would hear God's cry in the book of Genesis, 'Where is your brother? Where is your brother or sister who is enslaved?'" This enslavement, at least in our city, frequently happens because each individual Christina may well be undocumented, or some say illegal. They are taken up into a system where they are indeed enslaved. They become chattel. They become purely things. How is it that human beings could be things? This can happen when we begin to turn our backs on the individual personhood of people and we begin to see only numbers and statistics. Numbers and statistics are important. Care for our country and its safety is important. I'm certainly not going to deny that. But the best care we could do would be to bring immigrants out of the shadows. A number of people have indicated how our young people in high school frequently are afraid to finish or other things happen because their parents are illegal, even if they were born here. I've almost grown tired of bringing this subject up ad nauseum, but I have parishes where the list of those who are supposedly going to the parish and those who actually show up on Sundays are completely disparate. How can I talk about a parish that registers 2,000 families that had 1,500 baptisms last year? That's because half of those people are getting their children baptized refuse to be registered. They won't register for anything. It's what happens when you're undocumented and you're afraid. I can give that little statistics. It may be small, it may be minor, but imagine that magnified in all kinds of levels in our society. It's absurd. I'm for comprehensive immigration reform because it's the most intelligent. It's also the wisest way to deal with people who, as immigrants, certainly there are some members who are not good, but the vast majority of them want to be here, do productive work, enrich us, and yet they live in the shadows. If you live in the shadows, then you can always be the subject of someone who claims they will give you a better freedom, but they want to enslave you. The statistics here are the look at the prostitution rate and how that has forced the slaving of our young women. It's a disgrace in a great city like Houston. This is not necessary. So I'm here more as I hope as a moral agent, and I represent more than myself on one level. The group that started on immigration reform, a group of ecumenical and interfaith adjudicatory leaders some years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, we have always said the next step we have to deal with is human trafficking. So for us, it's all of a piece about the human person. I thank you for your presence today. I'm certainly open to some questions, but I think you're there. You know what we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Cardinal. Ms. Ashworth.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of such a distinguished panel. And I must honestly say, I think it's the safest panel I've ever been on. I love this. I'll just give you a highlight and sort of emphasize a couple of the points that you made in the introduction. And that is to share with those of you in the audience who may not be familiar with Delta Airlines and their efforts in human trafficking. As was noted, I've had numerous opportunities over the last several months to represent the company, not only in Congress, but in Washington Council on Foreign Relations, to describe some of the activities that we've implemented as a company since 2010. Unfortunately, but fortunately at the same time, Delta is and does remain the first and only major airlines to have signed the ECPAT code. And in signing ECPAT code, ECPAT, we have implemented 6 tenets against human trafficking. We have put in place a code and a policy against human trafficking employees. We have implemented training within our company. And within the last 6 months, and I would say, looked at our numbers yesterday, and we have trained more than 60,000 employees worldwide on behalf of the human trafficking issue. We've also included information in our supply chain contracts that speaks specifically against human trafficking as it relates to our vendors. And it is a daunting task, and so as you can imagine, an ongoing effort that we will work on for years to come. We've also worked with a number of NGOs and nonprofits across the nation, and that is expanding across the world in this fight. Just last Friday, for those of you who tuned into the news, It was noted that Atlanta, which is where the Delta headquarters is the #1 hub for human trafficking. That certainly is not a distinction that the city wants, but clearly there is much work to be done. In addition to being a member of ACPAT and signing the code, Delta is also a founding member of GBCAT, which is the Global Business Coalition Against Human Trafficking. We are one of 11 founding companies and growing who have set up also to work with NGOs, government entities, working with victims of human trafficking. I've been fortunate to bring a number of speakers to the Atlanta community and specifically to Delta Airlines. Not only traffic victims, legislators, law enforcement individuals, and in approximately 2 weeks we will have a special human trafficking speaker series, and Cindy McCain is my special guest. So you will hear more about our efforts there. I would like to say, and I think maybe this is a good thing, that as a corporate entity, our CEO, Richard Anderson, stepped out early and said that as a socially responsible airline, we're going and have gone beyond risk mitigation in our efforts. There are baseline activities that we put in place, but I can honestly say that from the top down, the company has moved forward. We have individuals in the company that are out, they are the ground troops. They are the real fighters in this war. And Cardinal, you said it so well, there's so much work to be done. And we've got to go beyond lip service. And I believe that we're starting that conversation. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Scott, I'd like to give an overview of the construction industry, what was on.
Overview of the construction industry, and I have to tell you that when I talk about this issue, I get a little emotional, a little choked up. There's a reason. It's because what I do every day, and I've done my whole life, is put the human face on this. It's interesting to think back over the course of my, I guess, young 33-year-old life. I've been immersed in this the entire time. My chosen profession is journalism. Forgive me for that. But I was born into farming in South Texas. And, you know, the people who worked our crops alongside me as a 12-year-old kid were not documented. I didn't know that then. I know it now. And those folks would work like a piston in an engine. You know, they just get the job done. And to see that as a kid and see how hard these folks would work, I had no idea how they got here. And I had no idea over the intervening years just how bad it got as far as the way they used to come in versus how they come in now. When I was working here at KTRH in Houston, where we used to do news, I traveled down to the border for a story and had the Border Patrol show me the x-rays of the vehicles as they would come across the international bridge. And the x-rays were fascinating because you look at a pickup truck, you look at an 18-wheeler, and these people are being brought in, stuffed into those vehicles like insects, into any part of that vehicle where you could fit anything. Sheriff, I'm sure you've seen these images. Just heartbreaking. They found one guy, the Border Patrol told me they found one guy in the dash of a pickup truck. The way they found him was they opened the glove box and saw his face. This is how people are being brought into this country. It's dangerous when they come in. It's dangerous when they get to the job sites. Now, part of what I do is at ConstructionCitizen.com, we cover the work conditions that these folks, once they get here, are subjected to when they're on some of our job sites here in Houston and across the nation. They don't get the safety training they need. They don't get paid overtime. In some cases, they don't get paid at all. Sometimes the boss on the job will simply not give them a paycheck. And so they're abused on the way in. They're abused while they're working here. And this happens, of course, in construction, which has the highest rates of violations for human trafficking. Agriculture, landscaping, janitorial services, you name it. If it's the work that you don't want to do, that they're doing. And I'm in that category too, right? And the fact is that if they get hurt, because as I mentioned, it's just not safe on a lot of these job sites. If they get hurt, they get thrown away. There's a great organization here in town called the Living Hope Wheelchair Association. And what they do is because most of the people who come to them who have been injured, who have spinal cord injuries. They've been injured in a way that they're confined to a wheelchair. They raise money for these guys to get them the basic supplies that they need to be able to live. And one of these gentlemen I met who was confined to a wheelchair, he told a heartbreaking story about how if he's on a job site here in Houston and a piece of the building falls off the building, the company has insurance for the piece of the building, but if he falls off, they don't have insurance for him, right? And this is the story of the by the way, men. I mean, we talked a lot about the young girls and the young children who are trafficked, and of course we should focus on that. But these are men being trafficked into this country to do these jobs as well. And so this crime doesn't know gender, doesn't know age. It's perpetrated against all sorts of folks. And to be abused on the land, abused while you're working here, and to be thrown away if you're no longer useful isn't right. And the fact is that it stays this way because our leadership, quote, in Washington doesn't get around to addressing the fact that these folks have to live in the shadows because they're not black.
Scott, thank you very much. Sheriff, we come all the way back to you. As you've heard from the construction industry, airline, faith community. Heard a lot about the sex trafficking, no 4 times as many in the labor industry.
Well, first of all, thank you all for organizing this important discussion, and I'm honored and humbled to be with this distinguished panel. But it's, one of the things I want to try and accomplish in the couple of minutes I have is to effectively do what Randy suggested, and that is for us to connect the dots. We're talking about human trafficking, we're talking about the casualty of it all, we're talking about the dimensions, the various dimensions of it. We hear often we talk about human trafficking in the context of sex slavery. Often we talk about sex slavery, and it's we think of females, children, young ladies, women, but it has been said in so many ways, just in these few minutes already, that human trafficking is involved in various aspects of labor, whether domestic servitude, whether it is at the local pub, the person's washing the dishes or serving the drinks or mopping the floors, whether it is migrant work and out in the fields, whether being smuggled into a car or into an airplane, and it's not just women, and it's not just something that happens in some other faraway land. It is happening in our own backyard. But we have to raise the discussion to understand that immigration reform isn't just strictly about addressing the issue of persons who are undocumented, but it is also an important discussion and an important tool to effectively addressing what is human trafficking and all the casualties that occur from that. And so one of the important dots that we have to, and I hope to maintain as a constant element of discussion, is that if we want to fight human trafficking, we have to accomplish comprehensive and effective immigration reform. There's no two ways about it. Folks are being smuggled here. Folks are better yet, being lured to come here on the promise of a better life. Plain and simple. No one is being lured here for the promise of working in a house of ill repute. It's not happening. But folks are being told, get you a good job, you'll be able to save money, you'll be able to send money back home, you'll be able to take care of your family, your children, your elderly parents, your grandparents. And that's why a lot of people are taking the bait. Oftentimes we talk about, or I talk about, the journey of my family. As Randy mentioned, I'm the only American born in my family, but my family came to the United States. It's very interesting with all the conversations we're having today, whether it's healthcare reform and the Healthcare Act and immigration reform. I had a brother who was almost died when he was very young. My parents realized that they needed to provide care, and they were very committed to doing that. But my dad knew that to provide him the care he needed back in Mexico would result in the entire family living on the streets. So at a certain point, he realized, because he had been a migrant worker, he had helped to build the rail lines in California, and so and he completed his contract, returned back home, played by the rules. But when he petitioned to come to the United States, the process was very fluid. He petitioned, went through the process, got permission, got his documents to come into the United States, brought the family, and that happened fairly quickly. There was a degree of expectation that if you played by the rules, you followed the process, that you would be welcome, and there would be a way for all that to work out. The line that he waited in, back in 1955, thereabout, is the same line, the same process that a much bigger world is trying to push through today. And so when we talk about human trafficking and we talk about immigration reform, one doesn't resolve without the other being effectively addressed. We don't want people to be smuggled across, and we don't want to tolerate any of this. Then we have to make sure that there's a process that has a certain degree of expectation, that encourages people playing by the rules, and allows people to achieve a better life and to work within the system. Without that, we're going to continue to perpetuate all of these casualties that we hear about as relates to human trafficking. One does not work without the other. We have to connect that dot, and we have to have that conversation very consistent with one another.
Once again, if you have questions, if you'll write them on the cards, raise your hands, we'll get them picked up. Start knowing the Cardinal schedule. Just from your, I understand in a few more minutes, from your perspective, Cardinal, start the questions with you, and if the panelists have questions of each other, happy to go there too. But how do you see the faith community? You've heard law enforcement, labor industry, what the faith industry's in and of itself has been active on immigration reform. How's that message sent home since every Sunday?
I believe there are lots of members of the faith community that are active. I recall just 2 years ago, Bishop Janajui and the work of the Methodist Church on the issue in our own communities. We have a very fine deacon in our own diocese who works on peace and justice and Dunning. We had made sure, in fact, we did, it wasn't an experiment, but we did a great job up in Kingwood, one of our major parishes, about this whole issue of immigration reform. People were hesitant, but step by step as you do things, people become more attuned. I would say, from the point of view of construction trades, by the way, we have a guy who's very involved in immigration reform, Stan Merrick. I don't know, Scott, do you know the Stan? Oh, yes. Listen, if you want to find out about construction sites and what's actually going on, take a ride with Stan Merrick someday on the construction sites around downtown. He's been at it so long, you tell, well, you see what they're doing here, they've got illegals there. It's very fascinating. Stan is, of course, passionate about immigration reform, but I think he is because he recognizes what happens when people can take slipshod approaches at construction sites towards workers, and then when those workers are hurt, they end up at our Catholic workers site or some other place because nobody will take care of them. Scott, I'm sure you're more aware than I am of that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it plays out all too often, and it goes back to what we were talking about before, which is the less value you put on a person. Everything is devalued. The value of what Stan's talking about when he's looking at some of those job sites is not only are those workers being mistreated, but now you're also going to have a shoddy building because, you know, for the long people who are investing a lot of money in a building are going to have a shoddy structure. And so everything is degraded because of the lack of value we place on the human beings who do the work, hot, hard, sweaty work that so many other people won't do.
Strikes me, Letty, if you do it with Delta, we could put pressure on other airlines. There are other airlines around. Strikes me that.
Fewer and fewer airlines, but, or fewer and fewer airlines, but yeah.
There are.
Well, the Cardinal's asking, Letty, what's the rationale for, in Texas, there's 3 major carriers, there's Delta flies here too, but there's 3 major carriers with hubs.
Well,
in Texas.
and we get that question all the time. I think we are starting the dialogue with some of our colleagues. And I step back because one of the things I think is very important in this fight is that we not shame and blame. I think we have to connect the dots by having dialogue amongst each other and supporting each of our platforms. I know just in talking to a number of other airlines, a lot of entities just don't know where to begin. Number one, they don't know where to begin. Number two, they don't have the bandwidth. And then they don't have an oversight mechanism, especially when you get into the supply chain areas. When you start to talk about what's going on in Cambodia, you've got to have someone out there monitoring what's going on in the field. And so while Delta is ahead of the pack, so to speak, I think it's also our responsibility to help share best practices, which is what I spend a lot of my time doing. Interestingly enough, I mentioned earlier, I think it's been about 3 or 4 years ago, we had a human trafficking speaker series, and I brought in a trafficked victim. She was a woman of Asian descent, and as she spoke about her experience of being trafficked, getting out, and then being re-trafficked by a female, I could just see the faces in the room as everyone was glued to what she was saying. I could tell that when she was asked the question of where this incident occurred, they thought that she was going to say in some foreign land far away. Now, I will tell you, she said it happened in Houston, Texas. And there was an audible gasp in the room because I think that for some reason, people think it's just not happening in my backyard, it's not happening in my land. As you continue to talk to victims, it's happening on planes, trains, cars, they're walking in. So it's everywhere in plain sight.
Cardinal, you have a diocese that houses a number of children under the age of 18 whose parents have been deported. The question comes, we pray at Mass for immigration reform, yet nothing. Yet Obama continues deportations higher than any other president. Should he stop the deportations?
This will be asking some kind of a political question, but my point is, I have been in those places where those children are housed on their way to be deported. What sticks in my mind is why. This is a young man who's 15 years old. He's from a country in Central America. His parents, we could say, weren't exactly good because they almost encouraged him to come across the border. And once across the border, he got involved with somebody who physically beat him up, put him into work. He was picked up by the authorities. We were housing him. If you looked at one trafficking victims look so normal, right? When you speak to them when they're safe, but the trauma that one went through is really intense. And you discover the trauma the more that person lives with you before they're deported back again. So in light of all that, right, so I put a human face on this. I say, yes, they should stop it. But I'm mindful of the pressure that is all over it, but I'm also mindful of the human face.
This is probably for all of you. What kind of resources or support is available to people working on the front lines who encounter human trafficking? And what's available in order to raise awareness of this issue in the general public?
let me just tell you from the law enforcement standpoint, there is nowhere near the amount of resources that we need to confront this. Although there are several common threads through several aspects of criminal activity that we confront, we deal with prostitution, and there's a common thread there. We deal with nuisance bars and things of that nature. There's a common thread there. But when we talk about the most innocent victims of human trafficking and how we and the resources we need to help them and find them and process them and go after the pimps and the traffickers, we don't have anywhere near the resources. However, we are trying to build a greater degree of strategy. The fact that we're having this conversation and it's interwoven with the challenges with immigration reform is important. But realize that we're fairly new into this game. In Harris County, our federal task force on human trafficking is only 8 years old. And just under my administration, we have worked to train all of our personnel, whether it's detention officers or law enforcement deputies, on the awareness aspects of human trafficking. But when we are successful and fortunate to rescue individuals, there's almost nowhere to place them. It's unconscionable that we have shelters for stray animals and livestock, but when it comes to a victim of human trafficking, there are almost no effective shelters or resources to refer those folks to. So there's a lot of challenges in many of them.
Let me jump in on that. I think what you're doing at your airline is fantastic. I applaud you for that. And I think that too often when we talk about workers' rights issues, whether it's these girls who are in the sex site or the sex industry, or it's construction workers, in the industries where there are companies that are trying to do the right thing, there needs to be more partnering. Government needs to partner with those employers. The other employers need to take a look at the people who are leading the way and follow and do the right things. At ConstructionCitizen.com, we feature these employers in construction. As you mentioned, Stan Merrick's one of those, Merrick Brothers here in Houston, one of those companies that does the right thing, makes every good faith effort to do the right thing, so that as a society we can move toward a place where this stuff just isn't accepted practice. It just doesn't happen. And it doesn't have to be workers versus the companies. It can be the good companies partnering together with the other leaders in the community who want to do that.
John, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, you're absolutely spot on with that. Earlier this year, on January 10th specifically, I pulled together a similar summit, but it was designed for businesses only. Historically, we're on a panel that involves NGOs, other government entities, etc. But there was a gap for companies to talk to each other. We wanted to make sure that we shared our best practices, but we were also inviting them to get involved, to break down that wall of fear that held them back from getting involved. And I think they were appreciative of the closed conversation. And I can honestly say several of the organizations that were there have already implemented strategies that we talked about. In fact, one of our major transportation entities in the Atlanta area have already started PSAs. There's already signage in their areas, in their bathrooms. And so there were some real takeaways, and I think you're just spot on with that. How do we have a safe conversation with each other?
How do you see the court, Cardinal?
Just one last comment in light of airlines and what Scott has mentioned. Sheriff Garcia is right that we're relatively new in dealing with some of this over the last 8 years. May I make one more point about another aspect that's been mentioned earlier? Houston is now the largest port in tonnage in the United States. I have 2 full-time police who are basically working with mariners. You should see the mess we have to deal with in the port. I think that's something we better also keep in mind. It's a boast of Houston, but it also therefore contains every possible problem that can relate to human trafficking in the Port of Houston?
What the Cardinal just outlined is, in the Port of Houston, less than 10% of the containers in the port are actually inspected, as opposed to the border where Scott, you know, the sheriffs know that the x-rays take place, the vehicle that's going on. Goes across the board here, how do you see the correlation with so many small groups working separately on human trafficking? From your perspective, should they unite? And if so, what benefit would it be to the victims?
Well, I've had a lot of conversations with the various types of organizations. It's really nice to see many of the ministers coming forward and working very, very hard, leading with their heart to recover or try to rescue victims of human trafficking. It is. I think there's obviously a benefit in an organized effort, a unified front. But at the end of the day, as a sheriff, I welcome anybody who's willing to help us tackle this issue. I think our biggest challenge, though, is what Scott has been touching on. I think it's easy to look at a cantina and a massage parlor, and probably be effective at finding some victim there, whether a domestic human trafficking victim or an international victim of human trafficking. But it is the hardest for us to identify the victims of human trafficking as it relates to the workforce, the labor industry. That is one of the toughest areas because for the ladies, wherever you're getting your hair done, your nails done, your pedicure, your manicure, there could be the possibility that the folks tending to you are victims of human trafficking. The folks that I call to work on my roof, at my house, do my landscaping, there's a possibility that those people are victims of human trafficking. And so that area is going to be our toughest challenge to contend with. But I'll say another thing too. No disrespect to anybody in the legal industry. We also have another series of challenges in contending with notarios, notary publics, individuals who just drain hard-working families of hard-earned dollars on the promise of immigration documents when it's all a lie. And so I'm looking forward to the day that I can arrest some person, some attorney out there for, I want this out. It's a huge problem, and there's a ICE has said that the Department of Homeland Security that they want to go after this, and I've been inviting them to Harris County to help me contend with. And I appreciate Patrick Castillo back there trying to put some initiatives in place to create some standardization and transparency to that process. But it is horrible to think that some law firms, or I shouldn't say firms, but individual attorneys who are just draining people their money with no degree of expectation that their lives will change. And it's just horrible to realize that it's occurring out there. So it's another challenge to this issue.
In the absence of real immigration reform, which seems very likely through at least 2014, as the Republicans say the president won't enforce the law, the president's urging Congress to pass something, what do we do in the meantime? Is there something the state of Texas can do, session concerns to control certain trafficking? What can be, from your perspectives, what can be done if Congress instill or Washington instill?
I'm not particularly prescient about the political scene, but I can say from the point of view of the churches and the religious communities, which has been, I have to say, usually major religious communities have been of one mind on this for some years. I think we place, in the best sense, moral pressure on our own our own congregations. And the moral pressure is there is just speaking the truth is all you really have to do.